You can just call me David. I am currently in Manila. Like others, I decided to write this because I also want to share this story. All the names I mention here are just pseudonyms because, as you know, like me, they also have reputations to protect. Disclaimer. This story is quite sensitive. I am originally from Negros and was studying nursing at Silliman University at the time. I was very fond of making friends, something I inherited from my father, who was a social person. However, I only chose my close friends carefully, the type who had no vices except for drinking alcohol and, of course, girls. I remember that I was in my second year of college in the early years of the 1990s. My friends loved to mess around, especially Philip, who was from Bayawan. We used to hang out near the bark, where there were a lot of cats. He would catch one, tie something to its tail, and attach an empty sardine can. Naturally, the cat would freak out, running around with the can rattling behind it. There were 5 of us at the time, just being mischievous. But behind all that, we were diligent in our studies. The only one who had a slightly different personality was Melissa from Dapitan. She used to stay at Carson Hall, but later transferred and moved out of campus. Yes, we had a female friend, but she acted like a guy. Melissa was beautiful. Sometimes we would joke that if she had been straight, all of us in the group would have had a crush on her. She had a small, delicate face that perfectly matched her body. She was also the reason we often found ourselves traveling to random places. She loved going on adventures. Melissa came from a wealthy family. One vacation, she suddenly invited us to visit her in Dapitan for her sibling's birthday, which would be followed by another event, like a town fiesta. It wasn't just a one-time invite. She kept insisting, and we couldn't say no to Melissa because it was going to be her last year in Dumaguete before transferring to Davao for school. So, in a way, her invitation was also part of her farewell. Even though I wanted to go, I hesitated because Dapitan was very far. I wasn't sure if my parents would allow me to go. I thought about it carefully. I could still refuse, and besides, I had no money. Even though I studied at Silliman, I wasn't wealthy. My only financial support came from my sister, who was working abroad. She sent me just enough for my allowance and school expenses. Then one day, Andres visited my boarding house. At that time, I was renting a place near Darrow Highway, close to the provincial hospital. Andres told me he was going, along with Philip and Romy. I asked if they had already gotten permission from their parents. But according to Andres, if he asked for permission, he would definitely not be allowed to go. That was also Melissa's advice, to just go without asking. After all, it was the holiday season. What parent would allow their child to travel such a long distance just to hang out? Andres assured me that it wouldn't be a problem because Romy would cover some of our expenses, especially the transportation fare. Romy was rich, just like Melissa. They were the ones who always had money whenever we went out. I thought about it. The holiday break was long since Christmas was coming. I could ask my parents for permission, but I would just tell them I was visiting a classmate who lived nearby. I really did end up lying. I will never forget it, and I deeply regret that lie, because it almost cost me my life. We met up at a building in front of CVP College. I was shocked to see Melissa's sister with her. All of us were left speechless. Her sister was unbelievably beautiful, almost like a model. She and Melissa had some similarities, but her sister had a well-proportioned figure. It turned out she was the one celebrating her birthday. She had traveled to Dumaguete because she wanted to go out and have fun. At that moment, I felt a rush of excitement. Actually, I think we all did. You could see it in the faces of my friends as well. It was still early in the morning, and there we were carrying bags like we were about to run away from home. As we walked toward the port, No one said a word. It was as if we were all reluctant to go with Melissa. But in reality, we were just shy because of her sister. The port was close to the school, and we arrived just in time. Within moments, the ship we were taking was about to set sail. Melissa's sister, whom we'll call Emma, was only 2 years older than Melissa. But if you looked at them, Melissa somehow appeared older than her. Emma had a way of looking at people. It was captivating. The kind of stare that pulls you in, making you realize only later that you had been staring back at her for too long. What do you call that? Hypnotism? Something like that. We were all having fun, laughing and joking around. Melissa was particularly amused and kept laughing, asking if we were surprised by her sister. By the time we arrived in Dapitan, it was already afternoon. I had initially thought that once we got off the ship, we would immediately be in their town. But I was wrong. We still had to ride a jeepney. The trip took nearly 2 hours. Their place was far from the main town, secluded, with only a few houses around. The jeepney we rode was usually used for transporting sugarcane. Melissa insisted that we take it so we could experience the rough journey to her place. Despite coming from a wealthy family, she even had photos of their cars. This was the ride she chose for us. When we finally arrived, the place was surrounded by countless mango trees. Some were tall, some were short, and some had branches that you could reach out and grab. Some of the trees even had pieces of paper tied to them, making it look like they were already bearing fruit. I could see their house in the distance. It was large with 2 floors, but something about it gave me chills. It looked like one of those old houses in vintage horror movies, the kind that seemed haunted. The place had an eerie presence, but the surroundings were beautiful, very clean, and we encountered a few people as we arrived. Melissa's mother came down to meet us, and I noticed how Melissa spoke to her like she was in charge, instructing her to prepare some mangoes for the guests. It was undeniable that she came from a wealthy family. This wasn't surprising to me, as many of the students at Silliman University were from affluent backgrounds. There were only a few of us from lower-income families who had to adapt to their social circles. But in the end, they weren't all that different from regular students. Andres was practically jumping with excitement. He had just spotted some Lanzone's fruit, which happened to be his favorite. He asked if he could pick some, and Melissa casually told him he could take as much as he wanted, even a whole sack, as long as he didn't sell them. That was when I learned that Melissa's father was paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. Her mother was beautiful, but her demeanor made her seem unkind. However, when she saw us, she was surprisingly warm and welcoming. She told us to make ourselves at home and that there were plenty of rooms for us to stay in. I later realized that the house we had arrived at wasn't their actual residence. It was part of their hacienda. Behind it, about half a hectare away, was another house that looked modern and newly built. That was their real home. Melissa wanted us to stay at the hacienda so we could feel more at ease and free to do whatever we wanted. She had this playful smile, as if she knew we were enjoying the old house. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt my confidence waver. The interior of the hacienda was grand. The living room was massive, with towering pillars and intricate decorations on the walls, hallways, and ceiling. It reminded me of an old chapel. Despite its beauty, the place gave me chills. Romy jokingly told Melissa,
"It feels like there's something here, like a ungo."
Ungo is a Visayan term for supernatural creatures, possibly an Aswang, or an earth spirit. Melissa laughed and dismissed the idea, insisting that there was no such thing. She even mentioned that if we went upstairs, we'd find portraits of her ancestors. A grand curved staircase led to the upper floor. The railing looked as if it had been carved from clouds, an intricate wooden masterpiece. But the moment I stepped onto the second floor, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. If the living room was creepy, the upstairs was even worse. The walls were lined with large, old paintings of people. Their eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went. Some of the paintings had cracks, as if they had been struck by lightning. Then, there was a massive mirror, so tall and narrow that it looked like a standing coffin.
David, let's stay in the same room, okay?
Someone said. I turned and saw Andres, looking uneasy. Someone said. I turned and saw Andres, looking uneasy.
I don't think I can sleep alone. Hey, what's the plan?
Andres asked the others. Romy and Philip immediately agreed to stay together as well. Who wouldn't be scared in a place like this? The rooms were large, with high ceilings. Some were completely empty, filled only with dust and cobwebs. Others had furniture, but they were all covered with white sheets, as if no one had touched them in years. To avoid the creepy upstairs area, we chose one of the 3 rooms on the ground floor, the one closest to the door and hallway leading outside. That way, if anything happened, we could escape quickly. Melissa found our fear hilarious. There were caretakers in the house, 2 elderly women who helped clean up the room we had chosen. Let's call them Ailing Curing and Aling Laura. Ailing Curing asked why we were staying downstairs when the upstairs rooms were much nicer and had their own verandas. None of us answered. We just exchanged nervous glances. We never admitted that we were scared, but then we found out that one of the rooms upstairs belonged to Melissa's sister. While we were busy sorting our things, we noticed Emma walking toward the upper floor of the house. She briefly glanced at us and smiled before continuing up the stairs. I watched her as she went up, but when she reached the top, she suddenly stopped and looked directly at me again. That startled me. It was as if she knew I had been staring at her. But this time, her aura was completely different. Gone was the friendly smile she had before. Instead, she had a slight frown, almost like she was angry. I tried to brush it off and ignored it. That evening, we ate dinner at their main house. There, I felt more at ease, less scared. Aside from Emma, they had another sibling, the eldest. She was also beautiful but very quiet, barely acknowledging anyone. She sat with her head down, but I noticed that she kept staring at Emma, as if she was worried about something. Emma, on the other hand, didn't join us for dinner. Romy even invited her, but she just shook her head and smiled. Melissa explained that her sister was probably just shy. She then excitedly told us that the next morning, we would be exploring their land, visiting the homes of the caretakers, and meeting some of her childhood friends. She joked that we might even find a match there since the next day was Emma's birthday, which also happened to be the eve of a big town festival hosted by one of their relatives. At that time, we thought nothing of it. After dinner, we were relaxed, carefree. Everything seemed fine. When we got back to the hacienda, Melissa invited us for a drinking session. She said they had expensive liquor stored right there in the house, in the next room. As close friends, we didn't hesitate. We all agreed. We were all strong drinkers, though none of us smoked, and so we drank. As expected, my friends started getting rowdy. Stories flew back and forth, mostly jokes and funny moments. Then somehow, the conversation shifted to horror stories. That's when things started to change. Melissa, of all people, began telling a story that made everyone uneasy. According to her, Aswang, Filipino shape-shifting monsters, were real. She claimed she had actually seen one before, not just in passing. She saw it right in front of her. It was eating raw meat, not human-like meat, but real flesh, something fresh. It still looked like a person, but its behavior was inhuman. It was incredibly strong, as if it had the strength of 3 people combined. She then told us where she saw it. It was inside the hacienda, on the second floor. I felt a chill run down my spine. I asked her when this happened. Melissa said it was when she was still in elementary and high school. She explained that the reason she saw the Aswangs so many times was because of her father, back when he wasn't paralyzed. Apparently, he used to take her there. I didn't know if Melissa was telling the truth. Melissa might have just been trying to scare us, but she looked completely serious. Even after a few drinks, she didn't slur her words or seem drunk at all. That made it even more unsettling. What was even stranger was that she and her family had supposedly seen the Aswang multiple times, yet they were never harmed. It was almost as if they knew it. Romy chuckled nervously and said,
So why was the Aswang upstairs in this house? Does it still show up here? That's terrifying, Melissa. What if you're just setting us up as food? Maybe you're just messing with us.
Melissa shook her head and explained that they had seen the creature on the veranda. It was standing at the end of the upstairs hallway, near the balcony, but it had disappeared shortly after. She insisted that the creature wasn't dangerous. It didn't harm people, unless provoked. Then she added something that made my skin crawl. She said it was possible that the Aswang was her father's pet. After that, I couldn't sleep. Even though I had been drinking, my mind was wide awake. I wasn't the only one struggling. When I looked around, I could tell my friends were restless too. They kept shifting around in their spots, trying to get comfortable. I could even hear Philip whispering to himself. If I remember correctly, it was close to midnight when I heard it. Footsteps. Someone, or something, was walking back and forth in the living room. The wooden floor creaked with every step. I nudged Andres and whispered, "Hey, do you hear that?" Andres groggily responded.
Huh? Hear what?
Then, after a brief pause, he stiffened.
Oh, you mean that?
I nodded.
I've been hearing it for a while.
Andres muttered.
Damn it! Melissa really messed with our heads. This house is creepy enough, and now she's got us on edge. What do you think that is? It sounds like a person.
Then he turned to me and grinned, though I could tell he was forcing it.
Wanna go check it out?
I immediately shook my head. No way. You go. I was scared out of my mind, but at the same time, I was curious. I needed proof. I needed to see what was making those noises, just to reassure myself that it was something normal. So, after hesitating for a few moments, I finally sat up and grabbed a small flashlight. I slowly pushed open the door, wincing as it let out a loud creak. I took a deep breath and peeked outside. The hallway was dimly lit by the lanterns in the foyer, but I didn't see anything. I exhaled slowly, steadying my nerves. Then, gripping my flashlight, I stepped out. There were 3 rooms on the ground floor, so I shined my flashlight into each one as I walked by. The first 2 doors were open, revealing pitch-black interiors. The rooms were eerily empty, their curtains swaying slightly from the night breeze. I cursed under my breath, questioning my own stupidity. What the hell am I doing? But I pressed on, convincing myself that maybe Emma had just been passing through. Maybe that's all it was. I checked every corner of the ground floor. Nothing. Not a single person. I debated whether to go upstairs. I hesitated, thinking, what if something jumps out at me? What if something's just waiting in the dark? The thought alone sent a shiver down my spine. Despite my fear, my curiosity won. I started climbing the stairs. At the top, my eyes were immediately drawn to the far end of the hallway. The balcony door was wide open. The moonlight illuminated the floorboards, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The hallway had 4 doors, one of which was Emma's room. I carefully checked her door. It was shut. I even saw her slippers neatly placed on a mat outside, meaning she was still inside. I exhaled in relief. But then, before I could turn away, something moved at the far end of the hall. I froze. And then, I saw it. Suddenly, the floor creaked, A soft thud came from Emma's room, followed by the slow, deliberate turning of the doorknob. I panicked. Was Emma coming out? Not wanting to be caught lurking in the hallway, I quickly slipped into the nearest room and hid behind the door. This was one of the rooms with furniture covered in white sheets. My heart pounded as I glanced around. The way the sheets draped over the furniture made them look eerily like figures standing in the darkness. This room was right next to Emma's, and although it was clean, it had a sickening stench, like something had died inside. It smelled like a rotting rat trapped somewhere in the walls. The air was heavy, suffocating. A dim light from the veranda outside barely illuminated the room, casting strange, distorted shadows. I stood still, listening carefully. Nothing. There were no more footsteps, no creaking of the floorboards, no sign that Emma or anyone had stepped out. If someone had, the wood would have groaned under their weight. I let out a slow breath, relieved. I decided it was time to get out of there. But then, I heard something. A faint, labored sound, like someone struggling to breathe, or gasping. I froze. The sound was coming from the other side of the wall, Emma's room. I hesitated for a moment before pressing my ear against the wooden paneling. The sound became clearer. It wasn't gasping. It was moaning. My mind immediately jumped to the worst conclusion. Was Emma doing something? The thought embarrassed me, but at the same time, curiosity gnawed at me. Was she alone? I tried to shake the thought from my head. No, I shouldn't. But temptation is a powerful thing, especially for a young guy. I hesitated for a moment before looking around the room. My eyes scanned the walls, searching for any gaps or cracks. And then, I found it. Near the ceiling, there was a small gap where the wood had slightly separated from the molding. A faint glow from the other room seeped through. I swallowed hard. Without thinking, I silently climbed onto a large wooden cabinet, moving carefully to avoid making any noise. The old wood creaked slightly beneath my weight, making me wince. I held my breath, waiting, but no one seemed to notice. Slowly, I pressed my eye to the gap and peered inside. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. It was Emma. She was naked. The moonlight streaming through her window illuminated her body, making every detail painfully clear. She was sitting on the floor, holding a damp cloth, methodically rubbing it over her skin. It was as if she was washing herself, ritualistically, almost obsessively. My breath hitched. Damn, I thought, what the hell is she doing? For a moment, I couldn't tear my eyes away. But then, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not mine, not Emma's. Someone else was there. Emma suddenly stopped what she was doing. She grabbed a towel, quickly wrapped it around herself, and walked to the door. From my hiding spot, I saw her open it. Standing there was Aling Kuring, the old caretaker. She was holding something, a large covered plate. She handed it to Emma. I strained my eyes, trying to see what was on the plate, but it was covered by another dish. Emma took it and softly said,
"Thank you."
As soon as the caretaker left, I thought that what Emma received might just be food. When she closed the door, I saw her face light up. She looked thrilled. She quickly sat down at a small table, eagerly placing the plate on top. Then she lifted the cover. What I saw made my stomach churn. The plate held dark, almost black meat, something that looked like a pig's liver. I was sure I wasn't mistaken. My vision was clear, and then, without hesitation, Emma devoured it. She tore into the raw meat like she was starving. My eyes widened in shock. At that moment, one terrifying thought struck me. Emma is eating raw flesh. What kind of person does that? The fascination I had earlier instantly turned into fear. Then as she lifted her head, I saw her face. Her eyes were wild, almost glowing in the dim light. I watched in horror as she continued to chew, the juices of the raw meat dribbling down her chin. I felt my stomach twist in revulsion. Slowly, carefully, I climbed down from my hiding place, making sure not to make a sound. As soon as my feet touched the floor, I bolted. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could. When I burst into our room, I startled Andres so badly that he jumped.
Where the hell have you been?
He asked, staring at me. I caught my breath and whispered, "Upstairs." Still shaking, I told him everything I had seen, and I didn't hold back. "Emma is an Aswang," I said. Andres frowned. He didn't look convinced. "Dude, seriously," I insisted. I heard something weird, so I checked. I saw her completely naked, and then the caretaker brought her raw meat. She ate it. Melissa wasn't lying. Remember what she said? That her dad used to take her up there? That's what they were feeding. Her father must have been raising it all along. Andres hesitated. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes, but he still didn't want to believe me.
I don't know, man. Yeah, Aswang freaked me out, but you can't just accuse someone like that. What if it's just in your head? What if Melissa finds out you were peeping? What do you think she'll say then?
I fell silent. He was right. What if this backfired on me? What if I ended up looking like the bad guy? I clenched my jaw and swallowed my words. I had no proof, no way to make them believe me. The next morning, my body felt like it had been drained of all energy. I hadn't slept at all. My friends looked exhausted too. Their bloodshot eyes made them look dazed, almost like they were high. But I was worse. I couldn't even bring myself to join them on their little trip. Before they left, I pulled Andres aside and made him promise not to tell anyone what I saw. He didn't respond, just nodded, and then they were gone. I was left alone in the house. I stayed in bed, refusing to leave the room. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to see her then. A voice called my name. It was Emma. She stood in the doorway, smiling.
Why didn't you come with them? Are you feeling sick?
She asked. I froze. I couldn't let her know that I was terrified of her. Forcing a weak smile, I sat up and said, "Yeah, I'm not feeling well. I didn't sleep much." Emma's smile widened.
Well, if it was just last night, then you should be fine now. Come on, you should go with us. Don't waste the chance to explore while you're here.
Then she stepped into the room. Before I could react, she reached for my hand and pulled me up. Her skin was ice cold.
I'll take you to the others.
I couldn't fight back. I could only follow. Emma pulled me along until we were outside the house, and from there we kept walking. She still held my hand, her grip firm, but gentle. Every now and then, she would glance at my face, as if studying me. I felt uneasy. We didn't know each other that well, but at that moment, something about her felt different. There was an aura around her that I couldn't quite place. My fear from last night began to fade, especially when she smiled. She walked slowly, gracefully, almost hypnotically. Emma was thin, her figure barely concealed by her light clothing. She was undeniably beautiful, her body perfectly shaped. But despite her enticing appearance, my mind kept replaying the events of last night. Questions filled my head, but I had no answers. I didn't even know where we were going. We had walked far, so far that she told me we had already left their land. This was another hacienda, owned by someone else. I remained silent. Emma seemed to be waiting for me to speak, but I had nothing to say. Then she suddenly said,
I'll take you where the others went, so you can see where they spent their day.
We arrived at a river. The view was stunning. A few houses stood near the banks, and Emma pointed out that some of them belonged to the relatives of their caretakers. She even pointed out Alinkuring's house. It sat atop a hill. I simply followed her as we walked along the river, heading toward a secluded area where no houses stood. The place was covered with thick trees, and the riverbank was grassy, as if it had been used as a gathering spot. I even noticed the remnants of a bonfire. Emma sat on the grass, staring at the flowing water in silence. I, on the other hand, anxiously waited for an excuse to leave. My nerves were on edge. We were alone. What if she did something to me? What if she was exactly what I thought she was? Then she looked at me, and that's when I felt my blood run cold. It was the same expression she had last night, the same look on her face when she was devouring raw flesh. Her eyes locked onto mine for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to say something, wanted to tell her that I needed to go. But before I could, she asked me a question.
Do you believe in Aswang?
I didn't know how to respond. I just stared at her. Then she stood up and took a step closer. She repeated the question, but this time, she took my hand. Her grip tightened. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. My heart pounded in my chest as my mouth moved on its own. "What are you going to do?" I blurted out. "Are you going to eat me?" My voice was shaky. "Have mercy on me." I said it outright. I wasn't even thinking. Emma's eyes widened. She looked genuinely surprised.
What's wrong with you? I was just asking a question.
Her voice was calm, almost hurt. She let go of my hand.
I'm not trying to scare you. I just want to know, do you believe in a swang?
I swallowed hard. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. I forced a smile and said, "I'm afraid of Aswang." Suddenly, she tightened her grip on my hand and abruptly asked,
Have you ever seen an Aswang?
She insisted that I had to tell the truth if I had ever seen one before. At that moment, I felt like I was going to throw up from sheer nervousness and shock. I really thought Emma was planning something bad, especially since she spoke so seriously. But I forced myself to stay calm. I took a deep breath and said, "I've only ever heard stories, that's all." "Emma, you're scary when you stare like that." Out of nowhere, Emma asked.
Do you want to see one?
I quickly shook my head and said I was leaving. I almost peed myself from the intense fear creeping up my spine. I was about to leave when Emma suddenly burst into laughter. She said she was only joking and just testing my courage in places like this. Even though I knew her personality, I pretended not to know anything. "Damn, Emma, you're beautiful, but you're also completely unhinged. I had no idea you were this mischievous," I said. "Come on, let's get out of here." Emma nodded and walked ahead of me. That's when I noticed she had blood on her lips, like she had bitten herself. My eyes widened in shock as she licked the blood off her lips, staring at me like she was craving something. If I wasn't mistaken, she wasn't joking earlier. Emma did that on purpose. And if I wasn't wrong, she had something planned for me. Instead of following my friends, I told Emma that I was heading back and would wait for them at the hacienda. But she told me not to be rude. Since I was already there, why not just go along with the trip? Her stare was so unsettling, as if she wouldn't take no for an answer.
Are you scared of something, David? Come on, follow me.
I had no choice but to go with her. But at that moment, I became more alert because I had a really bad feeling about this. I followed her, but I kept my distance. Whatever happened, I needed to be in a position where I could run if necessary. I didn't want to scream because it would cause a scene. I was convinced that no one knew the real Emma, except maybe her family and their trusted workers. If I started making accusations, I'd look like the crazy one. As we walked, we crossed a small alley lined with banana trees on both sides. The path was long, leading into a dense wooded area. Emma wasn't speaking anymore. She just kept walking straight ahead, not even glancing back at me. When we reached the end of the path, I was greeted by an incredibly overgrown area. If the riverbank earlier was eerie, this place was much worse. Emma's pace started to quicken. Emma suddenly disappeared within seconds. At that moment, I lost control of myself. That's when I realized I was about to be slaughtered. I ran as fast as I could, but instead of going back the way I came, I just kept running forward. I frantically looked around while running, hearing the rustling of banana leaves, as if something, or someone, was chasing me. The fear became unbearable, and I finally screamed. As soon as I let out my scream, something suddenly crashed into me, knocking me off balance. The impact was so strong that I was thrown far from where I was standing. When I lifted my head and looked up, I cursed under my breath. Standing in front of me was none other than Emma. Her arms were outstretched, her eyes wide and glaring with an unnatural intensity. She still looked human, but there was something deeply sinister about her. Drool dripped from her mouth as if she was starving. Then she spoke. She said I was a gift for her brother. It was Emma's birthday that day. Tears welled up in my eyes. I never imagined this would happen to me. I realized then, the invitation wasn't just for a simple trip. It was for one of us to be sacrificed. I screamed for help, shouting over and over that an Aswang was attacking me. Emma lunged at me and pinned me down. She was terrifyingly strong. No matter how much I struggled, I couldn't break free. I tried punching her, but she barely reacted. It was as if my blows meant nothing to her. Then, by chance, my hand grabbed her hair. I yanked it as hard as I could and bit her shoulder with all my strength. I don't know if you'll believe me or not, but at that moment, I had no weapon, just my own body. By the grace of God, I managed to escape, but I didn't let go of her hair. I didn't know why, but she seemed to be in great pain when I pulled on it. Maybe that was her weakness, her hair. Realizing this, I didn't let go. Instead, I slammed her head down repeatedly and kicked her in the stomach. She tried to claw at me, but I kept backing away while dragging her along. Then suddenly, she spoke in a soft, pleading tone, begging me to let her go. "You monster, you Aswang, you animal," I shouted. "I saw you last night. I saw you eating meat. I know what you are, Emma. Tell me the truth. Were you planning to kill all of us? Were you going to kill my friends too? Speak." But despite everything I said, Emma didn't answer. She only kept pleading for me to release her. At that moment, I saw the road ahead. I kicked her on the shoulder and bolted away. When I reached the main road, I didn't stop running. I didn't care about my friends anymore. I only thought about saving myself. When I finally reached the house, I found them all there. They were completely shocked when they saw me, covered in dirt, with scratches all over my body. I could see the disappointment on Melissa's face. I watched as her shoulders slumped and her expression darkened. I looked at my friends and said, "If you don't leave, you'll die. You monster, Melissa. You were going to feed us to your sister. Listen to me. Emma is an Aswang. If you want to die, then stay here." After saying that, I immediately grabbed my things and ran as fast as I could away from that place. I saw Andres following me, calling my name and saying we should talk about what happened. He told me not to accuse people so recklessly, but I didn't listen to him. I just kept walking until I finally got a ride to the port. There, I sat down and thought about reporting everything to the authorities. But then I hesitated. I realized there was a possibility that no one would believe me. That afternoon, I saw my friends approaching, and at first, I felt relieved. But as soon as they reached me, they were furious. They scolded me nonstop, saying I had caused a scandal in the village. They claimed I had been spewing nonsense, and because they were so embarrassed, they decided to leave the place altogether. I wanted to punch those idiots so badly. If I hadn't held myself back, I might have actually hit one of them. You fools. Doesn't it seem strange to you? This place is in the middle of nowhere, and we got invited just for a birthday party, and then they said something about a fiesta. But do you even know the truth? Do you even realize that today is Emma's birthday? You all saw my wounds, right? She did this to me. We fought for my life. She took me to a place where no one could hear me scream. If I hadn't escaped, I'd be dead right now. I said everything I could to convince them, to prove that I was telling the truth. I could see that part of them believed me, but doubt was still written all over their faces. Since they clearly weren't willing to listen, I didn't bother pushing it any further. I just said, "Do whatever you want. You'll find out for yourselves if I'm lying or not." Melissa still had to return to Dumaguete. She wasn't moving away until next year. If she never comes back, then you'll know exactly what happened, I added. After that, I went straight to buy a ticket. The problem? The next trip wasn't until the following day, so we had no choice but to stay by the port overnight. I couldn't sleep at all. I was terrified that Emma's family might come after us. I ignored my friends' taunts, calling me crazy. I didn't care. All I knew was that if it weren't for me, they would all be dead. If we had gone missing, people would just assume we had disappeared, especially my friends who didn't tell their parents where they were going. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Melissa had planned everything. She was the one who told Romy and the others not to tell their parents. And maybe, just maybe, Emma was already in Dumaguete all along, just waiting for Melissa's signal. Melissa never came back. That trip home, it was a one-way trip for her. She had taken all of her belongings with her. I could only shake my head in disbelief. It was only then that my friends seemed to finally understand me. Even Andres thanked me. He said he had consulted an albulario, folk healer, because my words had been bothering him about how we were nearly killed by an Aswang. And from the healer, he learned the truth. The albulario told Andres that he had been marked by the Aswang. I believe there was only one true Aswang in their family, and that was Emma. She was the only one who stood out among them. Even now, every detail of what happened remains vivid in my mind. If I hadn't been curious enough to figure out the layout of their house that night, we would have never discovered their secret. No one would have ever known what happened to us. I won't lie. There was a part of me that was mesmerized by Emma's beauty. Even now, I can still picture her body in my mind. But more than that, I can't forget the truth about what she really was. An animal, a monster. And Melissa. She had planned to feed us to Emma. We weren't just guests at that party. We were the meal for her sister's birthday.